Welcome to Avoid Colds and Flus Naturally. I'm Dr. David DeRose, a board-certified specialist in internal medicine and preventive medicine. I'm here to really help you master another very important medical subject. I say another because this is one in a series of presentations called LifeStart seminars. I'm glad to have you with us for today's presentation. It was the fall of 2014, and a contagion was sweeping America. No, not the contagion of infectious disease, but the contagion of fear. The Ebola virus was on American soil, and it was seeming to spread indiscriminately. At least so it appeared. The experience caused me to write a book. I called it Evading Ebola. My subtitle, Decrease Your Risk of Infection, Fare Far Better If Exposed. At the heart of that book was something fundamental about all infectious diseases, that we can be exposed to serious viruses, but can yet remain unscathed. That very theme comes front and center as we speak now about a more common illness, the common cold, and another common illness, influenza, commonly known as the flu. Now, the great irony of the Ebola outbreak in the United States, at least the Ebola outbreak in the world, at least in United States terms, was that we're surrounded by more lethal illnesses that seem to cause us relatively little consternation. We're speaking in this presentation especially about colds. Now, the viruses that cause them typically don't really do too much in the way of devastation. Now, there are some 200 viruses that attack the upper respiratory system. And if you look at the data, we experience in the United States alone some 1 billion infections a year. You say 1 billion, and we don't even have that many people in the United States. Well, that's because if you look at children who are most at risk, some of them are experiencing 6 to 10 or more episodes of colds per year. The average adult may have 2 to 4 colds a year. And yes, it hurts our productivity. Yes, we may be feeling under the weather, but many of us seem to just try to fight through it, just go about our daily lives. The problem is, although some of the viruses that cause the common cold are relatively innocuous, others are not so. We all know what the cold looks like. Runny nose, sneezing, sore throat, maybe a dry cough, headache, possibly a mild fever. Typically the symptoms last a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2. That's the common cold. But as an example of one of the viruses that can cause the common cold, think of the adenoviruses. This is a family of viruses that, yes, commonly cause the common cold. But they can do more than that. They can cause croup. They can cause bronchitis going into the lower respiratory tract. Adenoviruses can also cause intestinal symptoms. They can affect the eyes, the bladder, and they can even cause neurological disease. The point is simply this. Although a cold may seem innocuous, if our immune system is not healthy, if our immune system is extremely compromised, even a virus that often causes the common cold can cause devastating effects. Now, if we turn to the next viral illness that we're bringing under sharp focus in this presentation, we come to influenza. And influenza is a true killer disease. Some 3,000 to as many as 50,000 people die in the United States alone each year, just depending on the severity of the influenza strain that's making the rounds. Flu actually also gains entrance, similar ways that the common cold does. We'll speak more about that. The incubation period, that means the time from the exposure to the virus to actually becoming clinically ill, is generally 2 to 3 days. But you can actually transmit the influenza virus before you're ill. Classic symptoms, yes, respiratory like the cold, only much more severe. You can have a very high fever, you can have severe muscle and joint pains, and it can last a number of weeks. An important point, there is actually no such thing as the stomach flu or stomach influenza. Usually that term, when someone uses it, they're referring to food poisoning, something that we call gastroenteritis. We will talk about that some more too. Gastroenteritis also sometimes caused by viruses, other times caused by bacterial infection. Well, the focus in this presentation is to help you avoid colds and flus naturally. What does that look like? How do we avoid colds and flus naturally? Before we talk about that, let me just highlight one other thing. Whether you develop a cold or the flu, there are complications that can arise that are not just related to the virus itself. You can have severe pneumonia, you can have sinus infections, you can have other what we call secondary infections, because once you get the cold or the flu, your immune system is kind of knocked down further, and then you can pick up something else. So just keep this in mind. These are not innocuous diseases, even though you may have had some of them many, many times and never have seemed to experience anything too devastating. But whether it's Ebola, colds, or flus, there's a common denominator, and we need to talk about it. That common denominator is something called inapparent infection. It's at the heart of my book, Evading Ebola, and it's at the heart of the subject of how we can be exposed to colds and flus and not get sick. Before we go there, though, let me just tell you, if you've not been a regular visitor to our program here, the LifeStart seminars, then I want to let you know about some very important things that can help you as far as following along with this presentation and also picking up some additional free information. If you go to our website, LifeStartSeminars.com, you can pick up some excellent resources. First of all, we have a study guide that goes along with this presentation. You may have already picked it up. You may be viewing this with a group and it was handed to you in advance. That's wonderful. But if you're watching this for the first time, not familiar with how the LifeStart seminars work, make sure you go to the website, LifeStartSeminars.com, and get that free resource. Second free resource that we have is an e-book. It's a short book or booklet. It actually walks you through the paradigm that we will be embarking on in a few minutes that talks about natural strategies to deal with a host of illnesses, in this case, how to decrease our risk of viral infections like the cold and the flu. That paradigm is summarized in a two-word phrase. Actually, we put it all into one word, and we call it LifeStart. LifeStart stands for liquids, the proper choice of beverages, and other applications of water. We talk about interpersonal relationships. We talk about the F that stands for foods or nutrition. E stands for exercise. We're going to see that all of these things have a role in helping us prevent viral illnesses or fending them off. We may not be able to go into deep detail about all of them, but I'm trying to walk you through the construct just to help you see, even if you've heard it before, that all these things apply to viral illnesses as well. So that's life. Now start. That's a mnemonic as well. Each of the letters, it's an acronym type of memory device or mnemonic. Each of the letters in the word START also represent a healing natural remedy that can help us with viral illness. So the S stands for sunlight, the T for temperance, A for air, R for rest, and T for trust in divine power. Okay, let's bring this all together now. You can get the free ebook, you can get the free resources there on the website. And by the way, we have some other advanced resources for extra study. You can purchase, for example, my book, Evading Ebola there, or purchase some of the DVDs that I've done on this and related programs, as well as resources from other health professionals. But now back to the topic of inapparent infections. Just what is an inapparent infection? An inapparent infection is when a person is infected, in the case of our discussion now, with a virus, but never gets clinically ill. They look fine. Well, maybe they're a little fatigued, but they don't look like they've gotten the flu, but they're infected with influenza. Let me give you a powerful illustration of this that ramps up the stakes as we're talking about these viral illnesses. I want to tell you about another viral illness called Eastern equine encephalitis. If you're living in the western United States and never travel out east, you can rest assured, because EEE, the Eastern equine encephalitis, is pretty much confined to the Atlantic and Gulf Coast states. You're not going to expect to find it in California. Now, having said that, there is a Western equine encephalitis. And as you guessed by the name, this is a virus that can affect horses, but it can also affect humans. If humans are infected, they can get very, very sick. They can develop an encephalitis, which is a brain infection. Encephalitis literally means inflammation of the brain. You can get a terrible headache, high fever, chills, vomiting. In fact, as I'm talking about it, if you know much about Ebola, I mean, it's sounding a lot like the Ebola virus. The Eastern equine encephalitis can cause disorientation. You can have seizures, coma. You can die. Listen, 33% of people who develop clinical Eastern equine encephalitis infection die. Those that survive, most of them have serious or significant brain damage. And you say, well, why aren't we talking about this? Why isn't there a huge outpouring of fear about Eastern equine encephalitis? The reason for it is simply this. There are only a few clinical cases each year. Most of the people who get infected with this virus, mosquito-borne virus, never get sick. They have an inapparent infection. Did you know the same thing is true about the Ebola virus? Yeah, I'm trying to help you see that even these very serious viruses, clinical Ebola virus infection in West Africa, 70% of the people with it die. But the research indicates that many people in Africa have inapparent infections. Get Ebola virus infection, never get sick. This was a classic study from Gabon, Africa, back in 1996. 24 close contacts of Ebola patients, each of them directly exposed to highly infectious materials, feces, vomit, saliva, sweat, blood, you name it. Nevertheless, not one of those 24 people even got sick. When they actually checked them, researchers checked these 24 individuals for infection, they found that nearly half, 11 of the 24, had been infected with the Ebola virus, yet they never got sick. Why am I talking about Ebola in the context of colds and flus? I'm trying to help you see something. We may think certain viruses are innocuous and others are terrible, dread illnesses. What I'm trying to help you see is when it comes to viral illness, many viruses can cause severe life-threatening complications, even some cold viruses, for sure the flu. And so we get all afraid of Ebola when there are viruses all around us, whether it's Eastern equine encephalitis or the flu, that are claiming lives and can cause serious infection and death. I'm trying to give you some good news, actually, even though it may seem like I'm being somewhat morbid. Here's the message. You can come into close proximity with serious, even lethal viruses, whether it's Ebola, Eastern equine encephalitis, influenza, and you don't have to be infected. Remember, I told you about that study in Gabon. 24 individuals intimately associated, 13 of them did not get infected. But even if you do get infected, even if a virus gets a foothold in your body, you have the potential to fight it off without ever getting sick. Now that is good news. And it applies not only to serious illnesses, but it applies to colds and flus, which, hopefully you're hearing, are potentially very serious as well. What the researchers found with Ebola virus is the same that we're finding with colds and flus, and that is this. The key is the person's immune system. And so what I'm suggesting to people today is that we need to live a lifestyle that is aware of the presence of viruses in our midst. When I wrote the book, Evading Ebola, I said we should live an Ebola-aware lifestyle. When I'm speaking about the cold and flu, I say, cold and flu season, you should live a cold and flu-aware lifestyle. It's the same lifestyle. No surprise, these are the LifeStart seminars. You caught that? So what do you think we're going to focus on in LifeStart? That's right, we're going to focus on liquids and interpersonal relations and foods. You got it? Let's do it. Let's start with the liquids. The most important concept I can talk about when it comes to liquids is hygiene. That's right. It's the external application of water to articles like your hands. We're speaking hand washing in plain English, you understand. Here's why. When it comes to any infectious agent, by the way, this is true of viral illnesses as well as bacterial agents, one of the key issues is what is called the infective dose. What that means is you can be exposed to a virus or a bacteria but never get sick if you don't get exposed to enough of them. I mean, it's just like a battle or a war. Think about it. If you're at war with another country and they say, we're going to send 2 soldiers onto American soil and we're going to just wipe you out, you say, come on, 2 soldiers? I don't care where they land. I mean, 2 soldiers, how much damage can they do? Well, maybe potentially a lot, but they're not going to overrun the country. It's the same with infectious agents. Let's talk about food poisoning, because we mentioned that misnomer of, you remember? Stomach flu? No such thing. But gastroenteritis, that means an inflammation of the intestines and the stomach, okay? You've got this gastroenteritis, or the potential for it, if you're exposed to a germ called Campylobacter jejuni. Campylobacter causes some 2 million infections in the United States every year. Most people have never heard about it. That's because if you get that diarrhea, maybe some vomiting from it, it doesn't leave its calling card there. You just said, well, I got food poisoning, or I got the stomach flu. Like we said, you shouldn't be using that terminology. So why am I repeating it? Okay, here's the point. Campylobacter jejuni, even though it could be contaminating your food, you have to get somewhere between 500 and 10,000 bacteria to get infected. You say, well, that's a big range. 500 to 10,000? Why such a big range? Well, because our immune systems have varying fortitude. Let me mention something else. If you're taking medications to suppress the acid in your stomach, you are suppressing one of the lines of defense when it comes to infectious agents entering through the oral tract. And Campylobacter is that way. It comes through the oral tract. So your food could be contaminated. Maybe someone working in the restaurant did not do what those signs in the restaurant say, you know, all employees must wash their hands before returning to work. They didn't do that. They were sick, Campylobacter in their excrement, and they pass it along to you when they handle your food. I know that's not a particularly pleasant thought, but it can happen. Here's the point. If you are being more hygienic, even if you're exposed to Campylobacter, you may not develop the infection. Other infectious agents, more virulent, in other words, less number of viruses or bacteria can cause infection. Salmonella typhi, the agent that causes typhoid fever, takes only probably 15 to 1,000 bacteria. So tenfold or less than Campylobacter needs to infect someone. But again, you can get a few bacteria, a few Salmonella bacteria, Salmonella typhi, and not get sick. Ebola seems to take fewer viruses than those other agents. But here's what I'm trying to communicate. If you're exposed to those things, let's make the scenario a little different. Let's say the restaurant worker goes and uses the restroom and then washes his or her hands. Now let's deepen the plot a little bit. The restaurant worker uses the restroom, does not wash their hands, opens the door of the bathroom, thus contaminating the bathroom door. Then as they're going out to prepare the food, say, wait, I better wash my hands. I don't want to contaminate the food, so they wash their hands. Okay, the food is not going to be contaminated with Campylobacter, but it's on the door handle of the bathroom. So you go into the bathroom. Now we're talking about applying this concept of use of liquids and washing your hands. You use the bathroom, you wash your hands, you dry your hands, but then you throw the paper towel out and you open the bathroom door. Do you see a problem? You can contaminate your washed hand with that dirty door handle in the bathroom. If instead, after washing your hands, you used a paper towel to wash the door, do you see the difference? Think things in that bathroom may be contaminated. That includes the faucet. That includes the door. It could even include the paper towel dispenser. Think about that. keep your hands clean, and you can decrease your risk of infectious diseases, not just like Campylobacter and Salmonella, but you know what? That's how the flu and common colds are effectively transmitted. That's right. Someone blows their nose, they have a cold, they have the flu, and then they open the door to the establishment. We're not talking about a bathroom door now. We're talking about walking into the grocery store. You say, they have electric doors, Dr. DeRose. Okay, whatever door you handle, you have to handle. They're touching the boxes in the grocery store. They're touching the fruit. Then you touch the fruit that they touched with their hands with the adenovirus, and then you rub your eye or you rub your nose, you have just inoculated yourself with a virus. It all starts with liquids. Use liquids, clean your hands thoroughly, wash them thoroughly, especially before touching your face, touching your eyes, eating food. And you will decrease your risk of developing colds, flus, and other potentially even more serious infections. Let's talk about another use of hydrotherapy, water therapy, that can help you decrease your risk of colds and flus. Many people don't realize this, but if your respiratory tract is very dry, if the mucosa, the lining, is not moist, then that increases your risk of developing colds or flus. The bacteria or viruses, in the case of cold and flus, they're viral illnesses, can get a foothold into your mucosa, into your lining tissue more easily. So what do? Well, you prevent your mucosa from drying out. How do you do it? Well, you can use a humidifier in your room. Have you ever thought about that at night? Some people say, I don't want to buy a humidifier. You know, a very interesting strategy, one of my friends who's a family practice doctor has recommended, is he actually has people put a crock pot in their bedroom with a layer of water in it. And, you know, you use that during the day for cooking. If you're using it at night, well, you don't use it at night during the cold and flu season when the humidity is very low. The colder the air is, the less humid it will be, especially if you're in drier parts of the U.S. And you can have that vaporizer going throughout the night. It will keep your mucous membrane more moist and decrease your risk of colds and flus. Well, we've talked about liquids to some extent, and that's just the first of 9 strategies in the LifeStart paradigm, that acronym. What about the rest? Let me jump down to exercise at this point, because exercise is so important for the immune system. Back in 2011, Dr. David Neiman and his colleagues at Appalachian State University looked at the incidence of colds and flus in that community there in North Carolina. Individuals from the ages of 18 to 85 were included in the study, both men and women, and they followed these individuals for 12 weeks during the winter and spring cold and flu season. What they found was quite remarkable. Those who were exercising on a regular basis, 5 or more days per week, when compared with those who were exercising seldom, less than 2 days per week, those frequent exercisers had only about half the likelihood of having colds and flus and the symptoms related to those illnesses. So they may have gotten an inapparent infection, but exercise is an immune enhancer. Moderate exercise. Here's why I say moderate exercise. Researchers have shown, as was illustrated in the journal Exercise Immunology Review in 2010, that excessive exercise, as often occurs in athletes, suppresses the immune system. This particular study, they looked at a dozen athletes engaging in 2 hours of exhaustive exercise on an exercise bicycle. What they found is after exercise, their natural killer cells, a white blood cell that can help fight viruses off, like the Ebola virus, for example, dropped. And it kept dropping 2 hours, 4 hours after exercise. It stayed down at a low level, did not come up to normal levels even after 24 hours. So do not over-exercise. Let me tell you another natural element that can help you prevent colds and flus. It's in that LifeStart acronym. It's air, fresh air. Of course, the single worst thing you can do is expose yourself to cigarette smoke. But research going back to the 1919 influenza epidemic, this is an anecdotal story. That means it's something that has been told in medical circles. Some of these things are hard to document, but Apparently, in California, which is where I call my home, in Eureka, there were a lot of people who were suffering from that influenza epidemic, as was the case throughout the world, in fact, and they ran out of space in the hospital. So they moved some of the patients out in tents, out of doors. They tried to keep them warm. There was no heating, by putting hot water bottles at their feet. And what the story is that these individuals fared far better, the ones who were outdoors getting fresh air. So just an interesting insight. Don't lock yourself up in your room. Keep some fresh air circulating even if you're fighting an infection. Don't get chilled. Well, let's talk about just a few more things before we have to run. Foods and immunity. Steve Provenza, physician at Kaiser Permanente, at the California-based healthcare provider there, the HMO, actually wrote a very interesting article that appeared in Medical Hypotheses some years ago. Provenza basically, in looking at the research, found that when you eat animal products, the stress system of the body is activated. Now, you may know something about stress hormones. Stress hormones decrease inflammation. That's why we give cortisone shots. But when you decrease inflammation, you suppress the immune system. So Provenza's work made a strong case for us. If we're wanting our immune systems to be functioning at optimal levels, we want to keep those animal product intakes low, and we want to increase our intake of fruits, grains, vegetables, nuts, seeds, things of that nature. Well, let me come back to liquids, just since we're speaking about the stress system. You know, many of us take a beverage that ramps up our stress hormones. That beverage is anything containing caffeine. Caffeinated beverages ramp up the stress system of the body. That's why it wakes you up. And think about it. Stress system, remember, suppresses the immune system. Stay away from caffeine during the cold and flu season, and you may be surprised. Another beverage that has immune-suppressing effects is alcohol. Alcohol has immune-suppressing effects. It's something else I recommend you avoid. On the flip side, back to our LifeStart acronym, something you want to get more of is sunshine. In the winter, if you're much further north in Bakersfield, California, or Chattanooga, Tennessee, you're not going to make vitamin D by getting out in the sun. Take a vitamin D supplement. It's vital. Sleep, rest, stress management, all vital to optimal immune functioning. That pretty much rounds up LifeStart. I'm Dr. David DeRose. Hopefully, I've given you a glimpse in this whirlwind tour of some things that can help your immune system, help you fight off colds, flus, and other viral illnesses. You can get more information at LifeStartSeminars.com. Get the free ebook, free program resource, and you might be surprised. Some secrets on extra social support with some coaching opportunities. Check it all out, LifeStart Seminars. We've got to go. I'm Dr. David DeRose, wishing you the very best success in treating the cold and the flu naturally. Hopefully it'll never come knocking at your door again.